Hold it. Hold it. You are trying too hard to control. You must let it flow. Again. A knight must be in tune with the world around him. Feel the connection between all things, the ebbs and flows, heat, energy, power running downhill like water, exerting itself on all things. Yes. 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 He's got it. You are a force to be reckoned with. Everything is connected. To learn anything, you have to build on what you already know. Whether it's science, art, or philosophy, we can connect everything to anything. So let's learn anything. Let's find those connections and let's build our intuition. Welcome to Intuition. I'm your host, Evan Noce. Of all the things that science teaches us, I argue that energy is the most important scientific concept that doesn't exist. Allow me to explain. When we talk about atoms rearranging in chemistry, we are representing the physical matter that makes up an object, the physical atoms. If we were to talk about friction or aerodynamics, we are discussing the physical interaction between physical objects. If we talk about energy, though, there's nothing tangible about it. Energy cannot be held, created, or destroyed, or so says the laws of thermodynamics. An object with energy can potentially never use that energy for anything. For example, think of a battery. We know that there exists some energy within the battery, but what is it? Is it electrical energy, since the battery produces electricity? Is it chemical energy, since it's a chemical reaction that causes the energy to be released? If I removed any part of the battery and it stops working, is that energy wasted? If I leave the battery on the shelf and never use it until the end of time, does it really have any energy? Putting the metaphysics aside, I want to drive the point that energy is relative. It is a value dependent on the frame of reference we decide to choose. When I pick up a ball against the pull of gravity, I am giving it energy. When I let go of the ball and it falls to the ground, it expends its energy. If we consider the ground as the lowest point the ball can go, it has expended all of its energy to move from the air where I dropped it to the ground. However, if we consider the center of the Earth as the lowest point, it has expended only a fraction of its energy falling from my hand to the ground. The view we choose changes our perception of the events around us. Oh, I feel like I have no energy. New choice. I've got the most energy I've ever had. New choice. I have roughly 4.4 million joules of potential energy from the reference frame of the center of the Earth. With this example, I think we are well equipped to define what energy is. The potential to do work. Yes, work. Similar to how you spend energy every day to do office work or homework, a ball falling to the ground or a battery running is work. There are infinite numbers of ways energy can be converted to work, and work can be converted to energy. To build up our understanding of the value of energy, let's examine the units of measurement that surround energy. If you examine a light bulb or a toaster, you may be familiar with watts. A 60-watt light bulb, a 1,000-watt toaster. Watts are a measurement of power, or how much energy is used per second. This is useful for appliances since we don't really care about the total energy any given appliance is using, but rather how much energy it uses per second. If you get an energy bill, though, you may see the unit kilowatt hours. Since a watt is energy per second, if we multiply a wattage by time, we eliminate the per seconds and we just get plain old energy. In this case, energy is more important than power since the power company wants to know exactly how much energy you bought and doesn't really care how fast you bought it. If I use 2 kilowatts for 3 hours, I used 6 kilowatts of energy. Outside of electricity, energy is typically not measured in kilowatts, watts, or kilowatt hours. Instead, it is measured in joules. Bro, you got a joule I can hit? Be my guest. That is straight electric. For comparison, there are 3,600,000 joules in a kilowatt hour. While your standard AA battery has 14,000 joules, a tennis ball lifted 3 feet off the ground has about half a joule of energy. One of these things is definitely not like the other. Energy is a lot easier to picture in electricity because this potential to do work is clearer when we talk about a battery than a tennis ball, but the concept is identical. Though in order to connect these two, we need to talk about forces. In our day-to-day lives, we use the word force to mean pushing on something or someone, like how I'm forcing you to think about forces. I can also force a box across the floor. Continuing with the box example, we can then think of a force as a method of expending energy to move something. I'm expending my energy, my potential to do work in the form of forcing a box across the floor. The amount of force is also dependent on how heavy something is. I need more force to push a heavier box across the floor. Weight or heaviness is dependent on the object's mass. The greater the mass, the greater the force. This is the reason why a heavier bowling ball sends the pins flying even at lower speeds. The second component of force is how fast we push. If we want to get a box to the other side of the room faster, we need to push harder, regardless of the object's mass. This is a lot like the wattage of appliances, how much energy we're expending per second. This rate is the acceleration of the object. A car is a good example of this. When a car is stopped, or the car is moving at the same speed, you feel no force in your seat because the car is not accelerating. When the car is stopping or accelerating, though, you are pushed forward or backwards by the resulting force. Therefore, acceleration is the rate of change of speed per second. Putting these two together, we get what force is equal to: mass times acceleration. Heavier objects and higher accelerations yield a larger force. Mass is measured in kilograms, Acceleration is measured in meters per second squared, or meters per second, which therefore makes force kilogram meters per second squared, commonly called a Newton.
Did someone mention one of my famous
Wait,
theorems?
How did you get out? Back into the 17th century. All right, sorry about that. Now, to finish off before the break, let's finally connect force to energy. In our box example, there is one variable we didn't account for: how far we push the box. The further we push the box, the more energy we need to expend to get it there, even if we push it with the same force. Just like when we discussed kilowatt hours as a form of energy measurement, if we take the force we apply to the box and multiply it by the distance we push the box, we get the energy required to do that work. Can you guess what the unit is when we multiply a Newton by a meter? A Newton meter is commonly called a joule. When we get back, we'll see what this force-energy connection is capable of.
Well, if it isn't Telescope Boy. How's it going on, Galileo?
Aristotle, now is not the best time.
Nonsense, it's always a good time. What you working on?
Hey, give me that back.
Gravity? I take offense to that. You know I already solved gravity.
Yes, but you failed to account for the simple observation that heavier objects don't fall faster, and thus this thought experiment proves that gravity...
What's next? You gonna argue that Earth isn't the center of our universe?
Well, about that...
If aggression wasn't a vice, I'd give you a little taste of form and matter. I am out of here.
I give you a taste of form and matter. Look at me, I'm the father of logic. I'll show him. Everyone will agree with me that Earth revolves around the sun and the laws of motion are invariant in all reference frames. No one will have issues with either of those statements.
Welcome back. Up to this point, we have discussed what constitutes a force and what it means to have energy. Energy is the relative ability to do work, and forces are a method to convert energy to work and work to energy. Now, not all forces and not all types of energy are made equal, so let's break them up. There are two main kinds of forces, what's known as conservative forces and non-conservative forces. Conservative forces are like springs. You push against them, and regardless of how fast you do it, the energy stored or gained will be the same. For example, if you pull a slinky apart very slowly, as far as you can, and someone else pulls an identical slinky apart very fast, when both of you let go, the result is identical. It didn't matter how fast you gave the slinky energy, the only thing that mattered was the final position. Simplified views of electricity, magnetism, and even gravity operate under this same concept. Non-conservative forces are the opposite. They are path dependent. They care about how fast or what path you take and not where you end. Going back to the box example, if we push the box across the floor, we constantly have to apply force to it. Yet when it gets to its destination, it had the same energy it started with, assuming we didn't push it up a hill. So, where did that energy go? Friction. The bottom of the box was rubbing against the floor, which was creating a force counter to our pushing. For a similar reason, you have to keep your foot on the accelerator in a car even when you're not changing speed, since air friction, or air resistance, is creating a force that's pushing against you. Depending on the circumstance, these forces can eat up a lot of our energy while we're doing a task, which is why we tend to call them energy losses. All right, let's review. Conservative forces only care about the starting and ending positions and not the method used to reach them. Non-conservative forces don't care about the particular starting and ending positions and do care about the method used to reach them. Now, let's move on to energy. Similarly to forces, we can break up energy into two categories: potential energy and what I'll call action energy. Potential energy is directly connected to conservative forces. In fact, we can define potential energy as the energy stored from doing work against a conservative force. If we lift a ball up against gravity, we are giving it gravitational potential energy. If we pull a slinky apart, we are giving it spring potential energy. The second form of energy is action energy. This is not an official category that you'll find in textbooks, but I think it captures what all other energy types are. First, there's something important that needs to be said about energy. One of the defining characteristics of energy is that it cannot be created or destroyed. It merely changes forms. So, when a ball falls from the sky, it is losing gravitational potential energy. But since it cannot be destroyed, that energy is converted into another form: kinetic energy, or speed energy. Earlier, I talked about energy losses coming from things like friction and air resistance. The energy used to push against these forces has to go somewhere. And it turns out things like vibrations, heat, and sound are the way that this energy is dissipated. So, where does this leave us? We have a much better understanding of what we mean by saying something has energy. But why is this concept even useful to begin with? What is so important about energy that I was willing to say it was the most important scientific concept? To me, science is about finding a way to represent the world. When we look at complex events like an explosion, science can help us break down those events into individual parts. The chemical energy of the bomb dispersed into the air through heat, sound, and kinetic energy. As a result of this breakdown, we can predict how the world will behave before we even view it. To demonstrate what I mean, let's try to predict the power output of the Hoover Dam. If we took a liter of water to the top of the Hoover Dam and dropped it, the energy we could convert from that potential energy is about 2,200 joules. Since the Hoover Dam has about 1.1 million liters flowing over it a second, we can get about 2.5 billion joules a second, or 2.5 gigawatts from the Hoover Dam. Peak hours of the Hoover Dam report that it produces about 2 gigawatts of energy. Without even considering any energy losses, we got a very close estimate on the power generating capabilities of a massive project like a hydroelectric dam. And that is the power of energy. If you liked what you heard here and want to learn more, the content of this episode comes in part from the OpenStax textbook College Physics 2nd edition, as well as other sources which you can find out about in the description. If you would like to view a transcript or want to cite this episode, that information is also in the description. Intuition is an independent project currently run only by myself, so if you want to hear more, please share this with your friends and family. Your support is invaluable. That means valuable, by the way.